Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 32, Episode 10. Coming up on the show, we've got the Shadow Glass Doorway, home invading Vulcans of Arizona, and the hobo wizards of the New York subway. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
I heard you laughing about this today. What are the hobo wizards and where are they from?
Well, you know a hobo.
Of course, yeah.
You know, the smell, the look.
Yep.
They're carrying a million bags.
Yep.
They've got that crazy look in their eye.
Yep.
They're peeing into that tiny crack on the subway. Like this tiny crack.
We are all cognizant. We've all encountered them. We all pretend to check for change as we walk past, and then we go on with our lives.
Some of them are just pretending to be mentally ill homeless people.
Why would you do that?
Some of them are secret wizards with magical powers.
Well, some of them would like to believe that they're secret wizards with magical powers.
No, some of them are legitimate supernormal wizards with tremendous powers you will not believe.
Do you have any source to back this up?
It's from a new book, Paranormal States, Psychic Abilities in Buddhist Convert Communities.
Oh, I saw this come up.
It's by Douglas Ostow, who's written a bunch of books on Buddhism over the years. And again, one of those classic cases where he's got all these childhood experiences I'll go into.
Yes.
But one of the experiences later in life is coming across one of these very mysterious hobo magicians.
I'm skeptical, but I'm sure you'll reveal all later on in the show.
They appear to be crazy, but they're actual spiritual masters traversing the subway.
Okay.
It's like the masters in the East, the wandering master archetype.
Oh, I see.
Like...
Yes, yeah. And they're kind of like destitute, or they're vagabonds, they're vagrants.
Vagabonds, they're wandering.
Yes.
The wandering master.
But they bring wisdom. And
it's the same, but they're wandering from subway to subway.
Yeah, you know what? When you think about it, though, if you apply those sorts of ideals, I guess it's the same kind of thing in a modern context.
But lots of interesting stuff coming up. Because, of course, on the Last Plus episode, I covered that great book on shamanism in Mongolia. And going on from that, this stuff I'll be talking about later on in Plus, a bunch of similar stories, but mainly from people who have come to Buddhism later in life.
Mm-hmm.
And they're interesting stories because many of them have very diverse backgrounds. Like there's some Jamaican woman getting involved who has all these crazy experiences. There's Westerners, there's people from all over the world. And something seems to happen to some people when they start this serious meditation practice.
Mm.
It really seems to be the key, although not all of it, but part of this deep concentration for some people unlocks these really wild experiences and abilities.
Some of these people are catalysts, which is something that I'm going to be going into on this show, because you were talking about Mongolia, and one of the things that kind of came to our attention when we were doing that episode was that Mongolia is high in metals and minerals. It's got a very high copper content in its soils, and we were wondering, is there something about that content of metal in its soils which contributes to magnetic anomalies? Because there was a lot of supernatural events taking place that have been witnessed by many people. It's got a high concentration of not only shamanism, but all the paranormal phenomena that's associated with it.
Well, it came from the author we were covering who had an out-of-body experience when he was visiting Mongolia.
Yes.
And he noticed as he's flying over the landscape, as you hear from these OBEs, he just said the amount of spirits just hanging around was off the charts, like nothing he had ever seen before. And he'd had obviously out-of-body experiences and spiritual experiences in the US and the UK and in Western countries.
Seen this level before, right?
But for some reason in Mongolia, it was insane.
Yeah.
There was spirits everywhere.
Yeah.
And we wondered, why would that be the case? But then you quickly looked it up, like how many rare earth metals are in Mongolia, and it's one of the densest places in the world.
Yeah,
right?
So it's not just copper, which is relatively common. It's also all these other rare earth minerals. And I thought this is intriguing because this seems to be a recurring theme that we have with these window areas, these vortice areas around the world where very strange paranormal events take place. They're in locations that have high concentrations of metals.
Magnetic anomalies.
And magnetic anomalies, right? And so some people have suggested over the years that, well, what's actually occurring here is that the magnetic anomaly is somehow altering people's brain waves, or it's influencing people neurologically. And as a result, that's why they're experiencing these things. And perhaps it's a hallucination, a magnetically induced hallucination, or it's somehow changing the antenna, the frequency of the antenna in their brain, allowing them to be able to perceive all this kind of stuff. And I like those ideas. I think there's something to it. But the other factor that comes in is the paranormal catalyst effect. And these seem to be people that it's different in the sense that while they'll have their own experiences, right? They can go into one of these areas that are known to have a lot of phenomena, but they'll go into this area and you'll have people that have already been in this area for a long time and nothing has happened to them for decades. Like they've been yes, it'll be an area that has a high, copper content or other mineral content, and there's nothing at all. Then all of a sudden, someone will come along who seemingly is psychically inclined. That tends to be more the case of what occurs. And they're just like a nuclear bomb, a paranormal nuclear bomb going off in these locations. And then all of a sudden, these people that have never had experiences before start seeing UFOs, start having, weird humanoid figures showing up in their homes. They start having the most bizarre of experiences.
Oh, so it's spreading out beyond just these catalysts.
That's right. It's this person seems to induce this. So it's not just the person. The person individually can have minor experiences, but it's the person combined with the location that then radiates out and affects everyone else.
I thought you were talking about Bigfoot on this episode. You've been talking about Bigfoot the last couple of days. Now you're talking about something else.
Well, we will go into Bigfoot. And where this all comes about is, of course, we're going to be heading back to the Bradshaw Ranch in Arizona, in Sedona of all places, because Sedona is one of these locations that has like these red hills. And the reason why it has these red hills and canyons, and they're gloriously beautiful, but they've got this high iron oxide content. And of course, iron oxide is suggested to have incredible effects on magnetic fields. And so is it, because there's heaps of stories out there of people experiencing very strange things. One of the leading catalysts I'm going to be talking about on today's show, of course, is Tom Dongo. We know Tom Dongo's work extremely well, so I'm not going to go into a lot of his stuff in great detail, but rather, and we will go back to a presentation of his later on.
Unseen Beings, Unseen Worlds classic.
We haven't really touched on this one before. And this is an outlier, right? This has really nothing to do with what happened to him in Sedona.
Oh, really?
This is what happened to him afterwards when he essentially set up this meditation clinic or this meditation group, and he was besieged by what appears to be these astral entities that started attacking his clients. So I'll come back. I know.
Cool.
I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But
did you know that the Bradshaw Ranch was sold last year?
I do know. To the American government.
What?
Yeah.
So this is a press release from November 2023. The Icon Global was announcing that the Bradshaw Ranch, owned by NFL quarterback legend and host of Fox TV NFL Sunday, Terry Bradshaw.
Is this the right? I don't think that's...
Is that the right Bradshaw?
That's not the right one.
That's Oklahoma.
That's not the right one, but thanks for that. Yeah. No, it was sold. It was sold to
That's why
Sega.
They pay me the big bucks.
Well, this will come up again.
Well, I just Googled it and Sega was the first link, and I thought that must be something else.
No.
You mean Sega, Sonic the Hedgehog?
Not Sonic the Hedgehog.
Sonic the Hedgehog owns Bradshaw Ranch.
Not the gaming company. No, it was actually, this is strange. So apparently the American government convened Congress to pay out, I think it's like a $3.8 million price for the ranch, and they use it for climate change monitoring. Climate change monitoring in inverted commas, right?
The Southwest Experimental Garden Array, Sega. Sega.
Yeah. But it's not, some people believe that that's not the reason why they've taken control of that ranch.
Are you going to be going into this graph on soil description and the structure of the grain?
Pardon me. Yes, that's what the entire show was going to be. We're going to be talking about geology, geomorphology, and the effects of soil. Plenty of soil. No, it's not that at all. It's about the experiences that people have had at this location. But this all came about from a book, a relatively new book that's come out called Window into the Unknown, Encounters and Explorations of Anomalous Phenomena in the Red Rock Secret Mountain Wilderness. This is by Antonio Rulin. Very, very fascinating book. I'll link to it in the show notes. But essentially what Antonio has done is that back in 1995, mid-90s, he was deployed to this area with his company.
Was this the same? This is the same area as the ranch?
Absolutely the same area. Okay. Yeah. Very like in the hotbed of the area. So in 1995, he was transferred to a job in El Paso, Texas from San Francisco. And he was very excited about heading into this region. And he said it was his opportunity to explore the Southwest. And of course, going there, he doesn't really hint about any experiences he's had personally. But for some reason, he's like, I picked up a couple of books. And these books were The Alien Tide, Mysteries of Sedona, Book 2 by Tom Dongo. He picked up a collection of his books, looking at the bizarre experiences that have happened in this location. And he says Dongo's books seem like science fiction with all sorts of extraordinary claims of UFO sightings, encounters with aliens, underground military bases, black helicopters, and contact with ETs. And he said that he put most of this aside because obviously, and I've kind of had this approach to Tom Dongo in the past as well, is that when you read his books come across very differently to the way he presents, in person. I guess that can happen to most of us, but when you read Tom Dongo's book, it really is like you've taken an overdose of either DMT or LSD, and the whole book is just like, as you go through it.
It looks like he's very much into remote viewing these days. I'm just looking at his website here. Is that him with the hot Linda Howe? I think it is.
Yeah, it might be. But when you watch his presentations, of which I've got a number of his videos I want to play for you in a moment, he's very calm, collected, and describing these experiences that he's had. But going back to, Antonio, so when he picked up these books, he put the claims aside. He said the Alien Tide book was a better source for the locations. He wanted to find out the location because this guy, Antonio, is a hiker. He's an explorer. He wanted to go into these locations to see what he could see. And he said most of these canyons were northwest of Sedona and near the Secret Mountain Wilderness. And Secret Mountain seems to be the hotbed of this activity right up until the mid-90s, right? So around the same time that he was in that area. And in fact, he writes, Dongo states, I've come to the conclusion that whatever it is that is going on is not centered in Boynton Canyon, as many believe. The center of activity is farther to the north on or near Secret Mountain. He says, if there is indeed some sort of base, and this is what some people have suggested, that there's some sort of base, whether it's military, hidden, alien, interdimensional, who knows? He says, I think Secret Mountain is where it is at. And of course, that will become apparent when I play some videos.
Is that why it's called Secret Mountain?
That's not why it's called Secret Mountain. But maybe. I mean,
let's choose a location for our top secret base. I know, Secret Mountain.
Well, it is like the whole, I don't really buy into it, but the whole predictive programming thing where they tell you what they're doing before they actually do it. I'm like, maybe you're right. Maybe they've gone, well, it's a secret location. So, of course, he wanted to check out Sedona's anomalous claims and he would visit Secret Mountain and camp up there. He took some friends with him. One is George L., who comes up a few times in this book, and he wanted to backpack in there. He says George was only there for the outdoor experience. He had no interest in the anomalies, and he wasn't even aware of the weird claims that were associated with the location that they'd chosen. But he says, look, we got up there, it was around 8 p.m. He doesn't remember the exact time, but almost instantaneously, and he calls this chapter, it's like something along the lines of the anomaly, like this is the initiator of his experiences. He said, it's like we noticed this bright red light moving erratically on the desert rock outcrop in the distance. We had a full moon and there was some illumination in the desert landscape below us so we could see the contours and the shapes of the rock formations. And this light was moving, but it seemed like this red light wasn't just moving, it was dancing on the rocks. And it wasn't in the rocks, it wasn't on the ground, it wasn't being projected by something else. It was like an orb of some kind that was moving about in front of the rock formation.
So, orb of light activity in a mountain range. Tell me what's unique about this. We have stories about this phenomena in literally every mountain range in the world.
Absolutely right. So you're totally right. I think this is a good example of these are the sorts of events that ease people into the phenomena. If you are out there, right, and Tom Dongo describes this story of where apparently it was called the oil rig event, essentially a UFO the size of an oil rig. It was described, showed up over Sedona, did a few laps around the town, and then disappeared. And apparently numbers of people didn't see it. It's like they didn't bother looking up. And it's like, people saw this thing. It was just, and it created such an event. But that's not really going to pull people in. It's like, it's so far beyond what is reasonable, what is likely, that for whatever reason, there's this psychological effect where people dismiss it.
Whereas, so there's the lights like teasing them, luring them.
Well, this is a thing.
Rather than just going on doing its own thing.
Exactly. So he saw this, and of course, he starts going through these, thoughts about, well, let's rationalize this. This could be this, and this could be this. And he said, look, 2 years later, he returned. It's 1998. And he thought that he would actually, because it was so far in the distance, he thought he would go and explore that rock formation itself. And he goes up there solo. He said it was a night of sky watching, and then after dinner, he kind of headed up there. And when he got up there, he said you can see planes flying over from the north, from Phoenix and the Mingus Mountains. And there's just strange things going on. But in May of 1998, he visited Robber's Roost, and he climbed up this rocky outcrop where he thinks that light could have been in this area, in this region. And he found a campfire ring, right? And he's like, oh, is the campfire ring where the fire, like where this light must have been. But he's sure that it wasn't, because he's like, the campfire could emit this red-colored light, but it would not be moving up and down this sheer rock face the way that this was. And he said maybe this is the presence of a shaman's cave, which might be the evidence of a ritual, which suggests that this location already had some spiritual significance to it anyway. And coincidentally, when he's looking through, he's like, well, yeah, Tom Dongo saw exactly the same thing, these elusive red fire lights. So if you just go to the next image that I've included there, Ben, this is a photograph that was taken in 1997. Now, look, I know if you're watching this, or if you're listening to this, all it really is you can see a hillside of rock, and you've got essentially an orangey red light that's in the distance.
But obviously, there's no road there, so it's not a car. It's probably too bright to be someone with a flashlight.
That's right.
So, and it looks like it's taken in the evening, so it's not necessarily the sun reflecting, unless it's like the setting sun reflecting off his lens.
Maybe it could be lens flare. There's a possibility that could be occurring, but they insist that that's not the case. And in fact, Dongo writes that in the early spring of 1977, there were many stories of campers or UFO buffs seeing a strange red light flying around or sitting stationary out in the desert right in this region of Red Canyon and Casner Mountain. So he's like, I spent time up there and I photographed it myself. It looked like a spherical bonfire in the sky. It had more brilliant reds and yellows than a campfire would. And he got a satisfactory photograph of this at around 10 p.m. over a dome rock known as Robber's Roost. So this is like, it's not overly compelling, but it's consistent with what was experienced by Antonio. So of course for him, this was like the anomaly. There is something strange going on in this area, so he wanted to dig deeper. So he says, as he continues looking through Dongo's work, of course he immediately is drawn to the Bradshaw Ranch. And he says in 1995, Tom Dongo and Linda Bradshaw published their book Merging Dimensions, another book which I'll link to in the show notes. But essentially it introduced Bradshaw Ranch to the rest of the world of all the anomalous experiences that were going on. But what really stands out here, and I'm going to play you just a little video. This little video comes from a 1996 episode of The Paranormal Borderline. This is Bob Bradshaw. Bob Bradshaw had lived in this location on this ranch for decades and had experienced nothing until Linda, the catalyst, showed up.
I've been in this country for 50 years, and I finally saw something that proved that there was UFOs and spaceships. We saw this spaceship almost immediately, 40 or 50 balls of light come fast. They were traveling fast down that hillside and right into the ranch. It was really a spectacular thing to see.
Why does he assume it's a spaceship?
Because it looked like a saucer dropping balls. Like it was, and also, of course, he's got, Linda Bradshaw, his wife, who is, saying all this stuff is occurring. Like she was seeing a lot more strange things. Now, Linda, we find out from Dongo's work, and of course, working directly with Linda, that she'd previously had psychic experiences when she was younger, but nothing to this level, nothing on this level before. So of course, in their work, Linda describes them hearing things like orbs, portals, Bigfoots, aliens, even dinosaurs, in addition to Linda hearing all sorts of anomalous sounds, including hissing, glass shattering, growls, and odd smells. All these things that, come up and are important later on. So Antonio was amazed but incredulous about these claims, but nonetheless, he actually wanted to go and visit the area and see for himself what could be going on. Now, just before we jump into that, I just want to play you a couple more videos from this documentary or this television show just to set up what's going on, because back in the mid-90s when Tom Dongo was hearing about this stuff, this television program actually went out with a film crew to see if they could capture something on film. And they did. This green light that you see in a moment is actual footage of what they caught one night, and it was monitored by Tom Dongo.
Tom Dongo says they are familiar visitors to the ranch and can be seen almost nightly.
Well, that's one of them. Now it'll probably blink out in a second, but you'll notice it's almost not moving, and it'll get dimmer and brighter and dimmer and brighter. Very, very odd phenomena.
Just popped right out.
It's interesting how similar this is to what we've been discussing recently with the link to demonic activity. You mentioned
the color of the lights.
You mentioned that their ranch is having all this other poltergeist-like activity. And what are we seeing here? We're seeing them going out and seeking this activity, all these people gathering together, sending their intention up. And what do you know? These lights show up in the sky.
Yeah, and that's what Dongo ultimately ends up doing. Like there's this, and I've got another person coming. I don't think he does it directly. I don't think he's intentionally calling out to it. But he himself describes in the presentation that I'll play for you later on that he himself feels very similar to Linda in the sense that he's a catalyst for this kind of phenomena. And with this, when they've gone out to this site, it seems they've got a film crew, they've got collections of people. It seems to exacerbate the activity that's taking place. It seems to center around a certain the homestead for whatever reason, and there's no exact answer as to why that's occurring, but there's definitely something going on here. So going back to Antonio, he says, well, based on conversations with Tom, it appears that the Bradshaw family initially weren't keen on Linda's claims. Like they were like, not really sure, but of course, by the time the second book came around, it was quite obvious that there was a huge amount of activity that was taking place in all kinds, and it seems like not only Bob Bradshaw got dragged into this, her son Victor got dragged into this as well. And later on, Linda starts publishing her own book called Dimensional Journey, where she describes all the intuitive experiences she herself had before she'd gone to this area. So the question is, did she bring it with her? Or is it amplified because you've already got this spiritual location, perhaps because of the geomagnetic properties of that region?
I just remember being so frustrated reading her books because a lot of it was her interpretations of what was essentially orbs and light activity.
Yeah.
So you would hear her describe, well, the beings are coming in and they're light beings from here and they're communicating this and that. And then you'd look at what she provides and it was just like maybe a light next to a tree.
And look, a lot of that comes up even in Tom Dongo's presentation, but some of it is clearer. And so in these videos that I'm going to show you, which include photographs that he's had blown up and really focused in on, it seems to be a little bit more solid, if you will. It seems to be a little bit more less ambiguous. It's not just some kind of misty cloud in the distance. Although all these things started to happen to Antonio, these unique geomagnetic properties of the ranch seem to interact with people's consciousness that causes a increase in the phenomena that people are experiencing. But over the years, Antonio says, I've learned that the phenomena is random, it's transient, and it's exceedingly difficult or indeed impossible to predict. And that's something that I agree with. Like you can have haunted homes that people go into expecting to experience something and they experience nothing at all. And yet you have someone who goes into the same location who has no interest in experiencing something and they wake up with, a strange vibrating green slime Christmas tree shaped object next to them. True story that actually happened in one of these stories. So in all these experiences, this has been going on, but he says, in my 28 years of looking at these trips and going to these locations, I've never experienced anything until he saw those orbs. These orbs really did change things. So he said, we changed our tactics and started visiting Bradshaw Hill. And, most of their visits were during the night, obviously trying to see if they could catch light phenomena. He brought in people from MUFON groups. People started joining him. And they would get some anomalous light phenomena that would be seen towards the southeast, he writes, but nothing that was that significant until a little bit later when strange things did start happening. And he says on one particular night, it was the third night when they were in one of these locations, they had FLIR, monoculars, night vision, all this kind of stuff. He said, we had a spectacular observation. We saw 4 to 5 bright white lights off in the distance. It was west of Jerome and they were forming a diagonal line. Now, he watched these things and it was actually up in the sky like a train of some kind. Like it was a full-on formation which they were all able to witness. This is something which was just truly shocking to them. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to record it, but this was something that pushed him to the next level of there is something strange occurring here. So skipping forward to October of 2002, he said we had a loud, scary and anomalous sound experience near the Broken Arrow trailhead that goes towards Submarine Rock. He says, when I was out with Larry, we were sky watching on a red rock formation around the trail, which is no more than 1,000 feet from Broken Arrow trailhead. And we heard this continuous sound like a bulldozer approaching. It was like it was crashing through the bushes and coming at us from the north. Now, they weren't exactly sure what it is, and there was no road there, right? There was no road for anything to get through, and yet they were expecting this thing. Now, as they jumped up and approached it, the sound suddenly ceased. And of course, in the morning they go to inspect it, there's nothing there. There's nothing in the dirt. There's nothing whatsoever. So what was this sound? What was creating this? They weren't entirely sure. But again, you go back and you look at Tom Dongo's work, you look at Linda Bradshaw's work. She's describing these anomalous sounds, these weird experiences that people have. So the next thing that comes up is he says, look, when I looked at that Paranormal Borderline TV show, there was this other element that really started to add something more to this than just simply being UFOs, anomalous lights, those sorts of things. It was the interdimensional doorway phenomenon that seemed to be occurring. And this fits in with these humanoids that apparently started showing up, these figures, and this included Bigfoots. Like apparently there were Bigfoot-style creatures that were showing up. And even though they would materialize, they seemingly would walk through things. When they would go and they'd find a footprint, for example, one of the footprints they found was on this relatively hard soil. Now, when a human or when a full-grown man stood in that soil, it hardly made an impression. But the impression of the Bigfoot, which was about 13 inches, 14 inches, it made an impression which they said they estimated to be consistent with an 800-pound figure.
Oh my God.
Which is almost beyond
what a unit.
Yeah, this thing was absolutely massive. So these things were physically manifesting, but then dematerializing at the same time and leaving these things. So what were these things doing? But for Linda, she takes a photograph because this is what she started doing. So much of this activity was taking place that she'd run around the ranch with her camera. It's back when it was just film cameras, and she'd just take photograph after photograph after photograph. Until one day she took a photograph which revealed something that was absolutely not what she thought she was taking a photograph of. Can you play, we'll come back to that in a second. Just play video number 3.
Oh, it's a video.
It's a video, yeah.
Number 3, all right.
Linda shot a strange photograph that appeared to her to be an enormous movie screen in the sky.
A huge, brilliant light showed up in the sky. It was octangular. I got 2 frames before it flicked back out again. All I could see with my eye was the light, but when I picked up the photograph, there was a picture of another place. It showed a ship flying through the air, telephone pole. There are no telephone poles here. It almost looks like it might be on the shore of an ocean, and there was a humanoid in the far left corner. We feel that this is indicative of showing us that there is another dimension right here.
Now, what a great way to emphasize what you just said about some of the frustrations that you had with her work. Now, maybe it's because this is converted from an old VHS tape. I couldn't see any humanoid in that image.
Where's the humanoid?
But what I absolutely could see was that there appears to be this power line, like a post of some kind, telegraph
it's other dimensions with alien humanoids, but they still use telegraph posts.
It's really strange. It's a telegraph post with what appears to be a saucer-shaped UFO flying over the top with this water kind of scene before them.
Well, it looks like the watermark of the documentary is over the top of the humanoid.
Yeah, maybe. I don't even see. Maybe there's a head there and a shoulders perhaps, but that I can't see. I don't necessarily see that. But
we've examined the pixels and it's real.
I'm not entirely sure about that. But of course, all this stuff really grabbed the attention of Antonio, going many years later. So yeah, in 2012, the Southwest Experimental Garden Array, or the SEGA project, got a special use permit for the National Forest Service to set up a 20-year program to study long-term climate change at the Bradshaw site.
It's interesting, though. I mean, that would be the perfect cover.
Of course it would be.
For some other program, for some other observation.
Of course it is. Yeah, it's like, oh no, we're monitoring the effects of climate change at one of the hot spots of paranormal and UFO activity, especially when you've also recently had, people looking at Skinwalker Ranch. It's very unusual. Yeah, maybe there's nothing nefarious going on, but I don't believe anything that we're told anymore, especially in a place like this. So Antonio writes, this is the gates of weirdness suddenly opening. And in 2011, he and Larry planned another expedition to Sedona, targeting several places where anomalous activity had been taking place. This includes, of course, Submarine Rock, Robber's Roost, and the Bradshaw Ranch. And of course, he said, we went out there, we spent 6 or 7 days. They took Ryan Skinner with them, or he was invited from the Skinwalker Ranch research. And they were checking out this place. They carried walkie-talkies with them. And, which isn't really the reason why I raised that is because it was like later on they realized that the phenomenon, whatever it is, was playing games with them.
I mean, what you're describing is exactly what we saw Ursula Bielski describe in The Devil in Dreamland just a few weeks ago.
Oh, there are striking similarities.
That this initial activity occurs and it garners the interest of an observer who then brings more people in.
That's right.
Which seems to, it's not like the original activity was demonic as as Ursula might argue, but she does say that it doesn't start off that way necessarily, but this extra attention draws all these other demonic entities. That was her argument.
I hadn't thought of it that way today, to be honest with you. I had thought about along those lines. I don't necessarily feel that this is that effect which is occurring. I think...
But you're talking about all this poltergeist-like activity going on at the Bradshaw Ranch. I mean, to me, that indicates that's the very nature of this phenomenon.
Perhaps, but it changed, right? And I'll go into that in a moment, but it seems like at the very least, the UFO activity around some of these canyon areas abruptly ceased in 1996 when there was a huge unexplained fire in this region. So did that somehow alter did it alter the environment? Is that what it did? I didn't think it would be able to alter the geomagnetic properties of the area, but perhaps it did.
Smoked out all the ghosts.
Kind of. Yeah. Or if there is some base or something going on there, that it was deliberately set on fire and to remove evidence of it. I don't know, but we'll come back to that. But of course, Antonio says, look, according to Tom Dongo and Linda Bradshaw, there's this juniper tree which was split by lightning right on the ranch. And apparently this is a hotspot for being a portal location. So he's like, I wanted to go here. And he says, I was sitting slightly uphill from this windmill. There was this large windmill. And he says, I saw suddenly the windmill blades go from no motion to spinning at an extremely high rate of speed and making this loud noise that was heard by another member of their team. And then it just came to a sudden full stop. Now, he's like, there was no wind. The windmill blades never moved again for the rest of the evening. None of this is making sense.
So again, like poltergeisty-like
but having the
phenomenon.
But having the ability to affect something which is considerably larger than your normal poltergeist kind of activity. He said, then around 8:30 p.m., I heard this loud hissing sound that appeared to come from my right. He said, I spun around and, of course, there was no one there. He then got a walkie-talkie call from Larry saying that he was hearing this loud, strange hissing noise. And this is what Linda had been describing over the years, these hissing noises, these glass-shattering noises. None of it makes sense. But he says Larry's position was diagonally 750 feet away from me. And he's like, the sound didn't come from around us, but it was coming from near us. But they couldn't work out what it was. And he said, how could the same creature traverse that distance to spook us both that quickly? Is this some type of effect which is going on at this particular location? And, we're not entirely sure, but he says on the second night of visiting the Bradshaw Ranch, this is back once again in 2011, they took various positions around the ruined site because it's all run down and dilapidated now, obviously. He says there was small details that, I don't really see as being a big deal, but he was like, I ran up this hill and there was this fairy ring right where some of this activity being taking place. And, maybe you can read into that of like the fae folk kind of stuff. But for me, and he says this, like it's perhaps a coincidence, but there was an orange orb seen the night before in that very location. And it just so happens that western hill was called Fairy Hill. So again, what's in a name, what's happening with this stuff. He says, but then around 9 or 10 p.m., I saw this white glow all around the base of Bear Mountain or the Bear Mountain Range. It consisted of 4 rectangular blocks with a white glow. These things are back. This thing, it wasn't flashing. It had gaps between it. This large train-like structure, which was moving across the land. He called Ryan, one of their team, via the walkie-talkie, and he confirmed that he was seeing exactly the same thing.
Train-like structure. Yeah. So just lights linked together.
It's just lights, but it's like rectangular lights. So not like it's just a light. It's like 4 rectangular boxes with a equidistant space between each of them, just floating in front of this mountain range before them. Like gigantic UFOs, essentially. And he says,
but are they actually craft?
I don't know, and he doesn't know either. And what he says is that later on, he tried to draw it to recall it, and he recalled like it was 4, but I think Ryan recalled that it was 5. Something like there were these discrepancies in what they saw.
Because it brings to mind Lou Elizondo's work, which we covered recently, and he described the idea of these equidistant.
That's a good point, which I hadn't considered.
The gravity wave generators.
Yes.
So the configuration of craft that use this technology that supposedly Hal Puthoff has said could be behind UFOs.
Well, it had
you would space it out in a straight line, and have these generators equidistant from each other.
Maybe that's one possibility. But
that's why I'm asking: have they actually seen a craft? Is
no,
there
it's
metal? Is there windows?
No, it's
just
squares.
lights.
But it's not just lights, it's squares. Like when you see a light flying, if like I was to stand on a hill and hold a torch, you would see a circle with kind of rays coming out of it. This was perfect squares, or rectangles, perfectly edged rectangles that are all floating. And he says, though, what's strange, this bizarre aspect of this sighting is that neither Ryan nor I remember how long the sighting ended or how long it lasted. He's just got like this weird feeling about it. He says, all I kind of recall is that somehow the night sky went back to normal and they slowly, I'm not entirely sure, but perhaps they faded away into the darkness. It may have been 15 minutes. It could have been 5 minutes. He doesn't know. So there's this effect that's kicking in, that it's influencing people's cognition.
Then he went home and his lights were flickering on and off. And
maybe.
Some shadow was standing at the foot of his bed.
Maybe.
Before you know it, demons.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I don't necessarily think that's the case. He does say, though, that both of them around that time, around 10 p.m., from his position on Ferry Hill, he heard the sound of heavy flapping wings.
Oh, my God.
That's flying close to him.
There's literally a gargoyle.
But he did not see it.
There's a demonic gargoyle hovering over his home.
And then roughly 45 minutes later, Ryan calls him to say that there were weird noises and a light approaching him. He felt that it was a non-human entity. He called Larry and I on the walkie-talkies to meet him at the location of the ruin site. It's not human, he kept on saying.
Hello.
It's distracting me. I'm not saying it's demons. I'm not going there just yet, right? Apparently, they did see, though, that there was this low-lying bluish-colored fog bank around 75 feet away from them, but as soon as they tried to approach it, it kept moving away and then just dissipated. So again, you hear of these paranormal fogs coming up in these locations. There is something odd. There's nothing that's exactly necessarily anything that they can pin down, right? He does say it's like around 11:30 to midnight. He says this ruby red dot just shows up on the midsection of the windmill and it just is kind of moving around and then disappears. He said it was as if someone was shining a laser beam on it, but obviously there was no one else there.
So it's literally like teasing a cat with a laser. Yeah, it's like a cat,
yeah.
But they're doing it to humans.
They're doing it to humans, right? So a lot of this does feel like it's a game. Like it's like a game that they're playing. But this is where something else happens. And this is what Linda had also described. He says, around midnight, while I was at this windmill site, I suddenly hear this noise coming from the ranch house. It sounded like someone had gone wild inside. They were kicking furniture. They were shattering hundreds of glass bottles inside the house. They were just ripping the place apart. But he's like, no one was supposed to be there. And we'd all agreed not to go into the homestead. And why, even if you did, would you go and smash these things? So, of course, they go in, they run inside and they inspect inside the house. There's nothing. There's no shattered glass. There's no bottles on the floor. There's no critters inside the house. The place was completely devoid of anything that could have caused this loud glass shattering sound. But they look into Merging Dimensions, the book Merging Dimensions. And Linda describes this glass shattering noise. She writes, my husband and I were sitting in the kitchen having lunch when all of a sudden we heard what sounded like a huge sheet of plate glass shattering. It was as if it were right next to us. We both jumped at the same time. I searched inside out and could not find one piece of broken glass anywhere. He says later on, he said, well, I recall, in my research and reading books, that the jinn are associated with the sound of shattering glass when they're opening a portal from their reality to ours.
Well, again, it's just all the same umbrella. It's all poltergeist type activity. It's all hauntings.
Yep.
It's all kind of heading towards the low-level demonic side of the activity.
Yes, but even so, there still is a physicality to it. They are,
of course,
entering
absolutely,
into our space, and it's like lightning. Thunder, right? Like when air rushes in, it creates the sound. It's like when you create this, portal into our reality, it creates this shattering glass sound. Now, were they leaving? Were they there playing with them? That shattering glass sound they heard was these entities perhaps leaving as opposed to approaching, because it seems like the activity died down after that. But he says we're firmly convinced that I get from here that there's something strange. There's anomalous activity, but from that point, no other anomalous activities occurred overnight. And this research trip, he writes, confirms that many of the claims from Linda Bradshaw and Tom Dongo, the experiences also confirmed that the anomalous activity was not dead and was independent of Linda's presence. We now knew that Bradshaw Ranch should remain the focus. So this is important. And this is why I highlighted this, because what's happened is that's where we start crossing into what you were describing from Ursula's work before, is that Linda's come to this location And all this activity has taken place, right? And all these people have come, and you've had television programs, and you've had researchers, and you've had leaders in the field come and check it out. It's all died down. Linda's moved away. Yet these people, researchers, have come back to look at it. And what happens? They experience the same phenomenon.
It all amps up again.
It all amps up again. So then, he goes into this chapter. I'm just looking at time. So then, I won't go into this in great detail. This book I'll link to so you can go read it. He basically describes that he sees a Bigfoot. Right, he has this. I don't think he's expecting to see a Bigfoot. He says he goes into Sycamore Canyon, which is the second largest canyon in Arizona.
This is Antonio.
This is Antonio. This is located to the west of Sedona.
How close is he?
He's not very close, but he's close enough that he hikes down to the Sycamore Canyon via the Dogie Trail. He said neither Larry nor Ryan wanted to hike down with them. Basically, he's just going through all the kind of the minutiae of where he walks. There's maps of what he does. It's great from that sense that he includes a lot of information, which is, if you really do want to drill down deep into it, it's there. I'm not for the purpose of the show.
Follow his footsteps.
Or follow his footsteps,
Do the same research.
But he says, look, it was around 5:18 p.m. in the afternoon. He was lying down. He wasn't sleeping when he suddenly heard this crashing sound, like trees being broken or something being beaten up in the bush by a large animal. He quickly sits up and looks, and he says he can look to the south, and he sees this figure behind this bushy tree peeking at him. And he says, I detected it because I saw its large, furry black hand that was moving the branch down, trying to
really?
To have a look at him. And he's like...
So they couldn't see anything else, just the hand.
He said, I couldn't see its face or body because it was behind this tree, but I opened the mesh door of my tent to peer out to get a better look, and I yelled, who's out there? At that moment, that creature stepped out from behind the tree and walked into the open. And he's like, there, I could see it. And he said it was definitely some type of bipedal human-like creature that bent at its elbows and knees. But after seeing this, he said he ran into his tent in shock. He said he got this sick feeling to his stomach. He felt like he was in deep trouble and he didn't know what to do because he might have his GPS, but there's no way to communicate. There's no way of getting out there. He said, regardless of what this creature was, I felt that I was in danger, that it might later come to, get my food or attack my tent. He said, I had no energy to backpack out of there, so he basically spent all night worrying in his tent, worrying about whether this thing was going to come back. Demon Bigfoot, possibly, yes. You have just put up, if you're listening, a picture of Sukalos with Demon Bigfoot under it. Maybe. I mean, there's the other possibility here that you can't rule out with these sort of things that, and I'm not disparaging Antonio in any way at all. But he's read a lot of this stuff, right? He's read all the books. He's in that location. He's isolated. He's by himself. The mind can play tricks. I'm not saying it does, but it can.
It's a pretty severe trick to see a giant hairy creature step out from behind a tree.
Right. And then he goes, and he does actually something which I think is a good idea, right? He goes to the BFRO website and he starts looking around and he finds that, not less than within 35 days of his sighting, only 26 miles from where he was, there was a Class B Bigfoot report that was recorded in the database.
Oh, really?
So it's like, is it a coincidence? Does it suggest that there is something that's around here? Maybe.
How many times have we seen this over the years, this weird light,
frequently,
poltergeist-like activity, and then Bigfoot shows up in the wilderness?
I'm convinced a lot of this is the Bigfoot-like creatures that come about. But then, of course, we have the ghost car incident, right? And of course... And it sounds very spoopy and cliche, I know. However, if it was just a singular individual, like what happened with the Bigfoot sighting, you could go, maybe. Maybe this is kind of something you've kind of hallucinated. But he's like, no, in May of 2018, we returned to the northwestern area of Sedona for 3 nights of researching at the Bradshaw Ranch. And he said, I spent 2 nights researching on the northern end of Sycamore Canyon. They invited Ryan Burns, who is a seasoned Skinwalker Ranch investigator. They experienced essentially 3 nights of anomalous phenomena, but just nothing over the top, in comparison to what we're describing. But it was on the 3rd night where something very strange happened, where that essentially, in a nutshell, had set themselves up to kind of triangulate themselves across this particular area. And when they had done so, they had their walkie-talkies, so they were in communication with each other. And they had an FLIR thermal imager with them as well to capture whatever's going on. And he says, from my position behind the fence just north of this windmill, which had the strange activity before, he'd set up his FLIR and he was trying to capture something. But he says shortly after, Larry contacts him and says, hey, there's a car coming. And 1 minute later, apparently a car was coming down through the property. Now, he says, I switched on the FLIR thermal imager from standby mode to operating mode and scanned the horizon. And he says, I didn't see anything there. There was nothing. But Ryan was also via the walkie-talkie saying, there's something coming. There's something coming this way.
Why did they think it was a car? Did they just see the headlights?
Yeah, well, in fact, let's skip forward to what Larry says. So he says, in Larry's own words, he writes, I was standing on the hill at the east side of the ranch looking southwest, when I noticed a car moving on the area of the hill at the top of the ranch. The car was in the area that was kind of obscured from my view, but it was definitely an area that had no road. So in the image, Ben, that you've put up here, he's actually given an overlay of this area. It's a Google Earth map, but you can see in the black, that is a road. That is an established road into the area. But what they work out later on, when they all start talking with each other, that red dotted line that you can see here, which travels through very rough terrain. There's no way that a standard vehicle or even a four-wheel drive, he says, less a tank, could move through this area.
It doesn't look like there's a road there.
There's no road.
Yeah.
And it goes in this meandering kind of way, sometimes following the terrain, sometimes almost like it wants to be seen.
But again, did they see tires? Did they see the chassis? Did they actually see a car?
Not only did they see the tires, the car, the chassis, everything else, they also saw people inside the car.
Did they have hairy arms, like a hairy arm hanging out the driver's side window?
No, so Larry describes this. He said, I was able to see a young woman get out of the front right passenger side of the car. She quickly trotted forward past the front end of the car and then was out of sight. During this time, it seemed that the headlights were providing enough light for me to observe this. I estimated that it was less than 30 seconds later when I observed her trotting back as she'd gone somewhere. It's like she'd gone to pick up something. She got back into the car, which proceeded to leave the property through a way which had no road. The car came to a stop, reversed itself. I observed brake lights, and then it proceeded to head out of the property the same way that it came in, moving as if the terrain was nothing more than a perfectly formed road. Now, get this, right? The other factor is, at that one point there, right, in this map that comes up, at one of those points, that's the gate, right? So you can see where the black and red lines merge. That's the gate
to their ranch.
Yeah. The gate was locked with the padlock and a chain around it.
Yeah.
The car drove through it. Demonic ghost cars. No, I don't think it was demonic ghost cars. I don't think that that's going on. But you can start to see what's going on here with this, like they're humans. They appear to be human-like, but are they entirely? He doesn't describe exactly what they look like, and this is where we'll go back to some of Tom's work.
Well, it's like the description of Men in Black cars, where it's like a brand new Cadillac, black Cadillac, but it's floating above the ground, making no noise at all.
This is the thing. He speculates about this later on. It's like, could this be a UFO that was somehow, camouflaging itself, perhaps masking itself? Maybe was it influencing what they were seeing? But he says, look, even though I did not hear, this is what Antonio says, even though I did not hear a car during the incident at my location, he says his audio recorder that he had running did pick up this very low frequency bass sound that occurred only during the presence of the car. So it shows up in the audio. And he says the audio clip is fine because you can hear the windmill turning in the background and then this low bass sound.
That's interesting.
So somehow an instrument picked it up, and he looks at the waveform later on, and you can see this low frequency that occurred while this car apparently was there. But he says, look, the car took the path down the hill to the front of the property that has no existing roads. It was a steep hill full of bushes, shrubs, and juniper trees. It's not drivable for any vehicle except maybe a tank to get through, which I pointed out before. He said the vehicle was moving at a relatively high amount of speed, at least 20 miles per hour, like over what the terrain should be able to do. It passed through the gate. And then on top of this, no damage was observed on the trees or crops or anything afterwards. So it didn't physically affect its surroundings.
I think when you go back to that clip you had of Bradshaw saying this giant window opened in the sky and she saw a telegraph pole and it was somewhere else, and then you've got this car driving where there's not a road and people seeming to act like there should be a road. Are they just viewing, like, is there an overlapping multiverse? Are we talking like overlapping dimensions and they're seeing something leaking through? Like in another world, there really is a road there and there are people driving to their ranch in another dimension.
Yes, I think you're onto something, because that did occur to me. That's something which is not mentioned by Antonio, but I'm sure is something which would occur as well. It's like, I know we're joking about the demonic stuff, right? But maybe it's not that at all. Maybe it simply is. It's a parallel dimension. It's actually a parallel dimension of a similar group of humanity which has just had little differences. And those little differences has led them to be just a little bit different from us. And it's like they have similar technology like telegraph poles, but also they have apparently UFOs. Who knows? I mean, your mind could just, run with the possibilities of what's going on here. But before I get to this book and go into some of the weird phenomena that was experienced by Tom Dongo himself at this location, at this ranch, he says, look, Seeger placed cameras on the Bradshaw Ranch in 2017, and it's been recording digital images ever since then. Now, of course, with capturing digital images, he wondered if strange things had been recorded. And he says in October of 2021, the number of photographs being taken per day was reduced to 1 per hour. But as a result of this, still, there's a probability of capturing something anomalous via photographs. And nonetheless, weird anomalous images are being captured. So I've got a couple here. So if you just bring up this one, Ben, this is a light anomaly that was captured by Seeger cameras on May the 14th in 2019 at 3:50 p.m. Now, again, this could be lens flare. It could be any type of artifact. But in the top left-hand side or the mid-left-hand side of this image, you can see
it.
What appears to be a double orb red-like phenomena that hasn't been. Now, in the book, he does include other images. He's like, that image wasn't there before, the previously captured image. This is supposed to be an abandoned location as well. So, I mean, occasionally you will have scientists show up to do whatever they have to do, whatever that may be. But this is, not like someone's driven something up there which is reflecting in the sun.
The fact that this is some government climate observance operation.
It speaks so much as to what could really be occurring.
It reminds me of the latest Alan Wake game, because they have the Federal Bureau of Control.
Right.
And very early on in the game, you run into this guy who's working on, I think it's actually like a climate monitoring station.
Yeah, it's whatever's the current thing is the cover-up.
Yeah, and he's inside, and later on in the game, you get in there and it's observing the
demons.
It's observing the paranormal activity going on in that area.
Yeah, and I think this is what this particular location may be, and that will become more apparent in a moment. But then there was this other factor that came up. Just bring up the next image that's just in there, Ben.
Yeah.
No, not that one, not demonic parallel dimensions. I knew you had that one ready to go. This one's a little bit more unusual. It's very difficult to see in this, and I did zoom in on it. If you zoom in on the bottom right-hand corner there, Ben.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen this one before.
Apparently, the Seeger images captured some type of figure that is, without doubt, according to some researchers, a Bigfoot. So on the right, Ben.
So the first photo on the left is 4:15 p.m. This is photo A.
That's
and you
right.
zoom in and there's a figure there.
There's a humanoid figure.
The second figure is an hour later and there's nothing there.
Right.
So what was it in the first image?
That's the question. And it seemed to be bigger than a standard human form, but of course that's very difficult to make out because it really just comes down to pixels.
It's funny because before you told me what it could be, I just would have thought tree stump.
Me too.
But now that you say Bigfoot, I'm now primed and I can totally see him in there. I can totally see his head and his shoulders and everything.
Yeah, isn't it weird?
You've primed me.
That's the thing, right? Is it like this weird anomaly priming that kicks in, and this is why you have these experiences?
Like if you told me kangaroo, I probably would see a kangaroo.
Maybe, I don't know. I do see like a lurching forward, especially when you zoom out. It does look like some type of classic, Patterson-Gimlin style Bigfoot gated creature that's moving through the shot. But yeah, look, it's so open to interpretation, and it could truly be nothing.
Burger, isn't it?
It could be nothing, right? And this is what this kind of stuff does. The phenomena remains elusive. It always remains elusive. It's very difficult to capture any of this. It only shows itself when it wants to be shown.
I'd be thinking about, to be really boring, artifacts in the video. Like, obviously, this is a digital video. It's been transferred digitally. It's been compressed.
Yep.
You get all sorts of artifacts showing up.
That's the thing, right? If this was just by itself, you could be like, yeah, that's possible. But this is part of a greater ongoing incidence, right, of this activity taking place. So the other thing that comes up, and I don't have the images included here, but they are included in the book because it didn't transfer well. I'm like, you can't really see it. But there is a 300 to 400 pound plastic water tank, right? In one of the photos, the water tank is like lying on its side, like someone's knocked it over. And then in the next image, an hour later, someone's picked it back up.
Huh?
And he's like, there's no one there.
How?
That's the thing. It's like there's no one there. So the phenomena, whatever it is, has somehow altered the surroundings. But why? Like, why why would it do that? And of course, like, again, all open to interpretation. When you go through the book itself, there's color images that are included. There's black and white images, plenty of saucer-shaped things showing up. The plastic teal-colored water tank, he said this was captured on April the 18th, 2021 at 3:45 with photos taken 30 minutes before and after.
So it's kind of like this, the bear that fixes up the traffic cone.
Kind of.
He just walks along, it's tipped over, puts it upright, goes along his way. But it's not a bear. It's obviously a Bigfoot. It's obviously a Bigfoot that's fixed the water tank.
Well, what he says is figures 46 and 47 show the photographs of the tank before and after the move in April of 2021. During that day, the Sega photos and image captures do not capture any vehicles or people on the property at all.
You must have been riveted at this stage.
I was just like,
when you were seeing the before and after photos of the water tank, riveted.
Well, that's why I skipped over it, because I'm like, I can't really see.
Like 2 chapters on it.
Yeah, exactly. So none of that I included. But yeah, you've got the FLIR images that came, which I showed you there of that creature as well. So look, without a doubt, there's definitely something strange which is going on there.
Yeah, for sure.
But what that is, I don't know. So later on in the book, towards the end, he goes into the chapter called Weirdness in the Canyons, Windows, Portals, and Doorways, which, is consistent with what we've been talking about. And he says, look, there's a man by the name of Todd Michael, who's a Sedona UFO researcher. He claims himself to have seen many portal openings in the sky over Fay Canyon between 2009 and 2011. This is why while he was working as essentially he was working at a downtown UFO store, but then became like he would take people out for like the equivalent of, what's it called?
Tours.
Yeah, they're tours, but they're like calling in contact tours.
Oh, so like a Stephen Greer.
A little bit Greerish.
Sea-setty style.
Yeah, that kind of thing, right? And in his book, he has a book called Alien Contact. This is former Arizona tour guide tells all. I can't get this book.
What do you mean?
I tried to get this book yesterday. I could. It's not on Amazon. His website's gone. It's
many such cases.
Many such cases of this stuff. And I'm like, is that just because it's just an obscure book?
Yeah.
Or like, which is probably
because it's self-published, they printed like 50 copies. And
I've got some audio from, where is it? I'll come back to it in a moment. It's from the California MUFON. It's like a podcast that was done. What's the name of the person? It was the Laureen Fenton California MUFON Radio, which I'll come back to. But look, he says, like, some of the people that he's been with, there's a description of case 40 in the book and also case 41. One of the witnesses said that in the sky just above the trees appeared to be a ball of golden light. It grew larger and brighter and seemed to swirl around itself. The intensity of the light grew until it burst into a bright flash of light in the shape of a diamond. It looked like a sci-fi portal or stargate from which 2 craft shot out. The craft to our left went right towards Fay Canyon, which was on the other side of the mountain in front of us, and the second craft raced off in the direction of Cathedral Rock.
I'm loving these dimensional windows opening up in the sky.
Oh, it's so really cool. It's like really cool. So he includes, a couple of those. So I started digging, though. I wanted to see about, what Michael's background was, Todd Michael's background was. And he's an interesting character. So when I'll link to the full audio in the show notes. So you can go. It's like 2 hours long. But essentially,
you went through 2 hours of this?
2 hours of this. Fascinating guy. I've cut this all up, so it might seem a bit jerky and disjointed because I had the way that I had to cut it up. It's not very clean because of just the way the audio went. But that's not really important. He basically describes that he has fallen through a great many portals himself, and he just happened right to fall through a portal in Kawani Lapsaridis' backyard.
What, the Kawani Lapsaridis?
That's right. Yes, the Bigfoot portal guy himself.
Oh my gosh.
So this is Todd Michael describing that incident.
The one where the portal opened up beside me and I went through that one, that was actually in Kawani's backyard, camped in my tent, and I was all excited. He told me where they come in to backyard from and where they exit. And I put my tent right in the middle of their path, so they would have to walk between me and his kind of lean-to storage area. And so I was just so jazzed up I couldn't sleep, and it must have been like 4 a.m. when I finally got some shut-eye, but it wasn't a lot. And I remember I was laying on my stomach, and I had my hands under the pillow, and all of a sudden my right elbow starts to drop down as though I'm levitating. Next thing you know, I feel like I'm sliding down a hill on a magic carpet. I can feel things moving around me. And then I noticed there's this something's running circles around my tent really fast. And then I saw him. He stopped and he was facing me. I'm sitting out there looking at this guy, and I thought it was me. He was definitely a Bigfoot type, but he had very little body hair, and Kiwani calls those ancient ones. And then he starts running around the tent again, and he becomes a blur. He's going so fast, and I turn over. I'm actually sitting up, so I just kind of roll back, and I see a portal opening up. I mean, I got sucked through it. But I don't remember what happened.
So some nude man shows up, just a hairy nude dude.
A hairy nude dude shows
runs
up.
naked around his tent and then drags him into a portal, and he can't remember what happened?
Yes. And let's break it down even more than that, right? Because there was a few things in there, obviously because I've listened to it for a few times now when I was editing it. He says, I thought it was me. I'm like,
what is
what
that?
What do you mean? What do you mean you thought it was you?
Because it looked like a man.
Well, no.
Why would you even say that?
Because later on in this interview, right, he goes into this weird thing that he was like in the military, and he goes off on this kind of tangent where he was in the military, and when you complete basic training, you're given something called the dream sheet, right? And I'm thinking this is like some remote viewing program or something.
What?
No, it's like you're given a sheet of paper that you can say where you want to go and what you want to do.
Oh,
like
for your future career.
For your future career, right? And he said, like, he goes into this kind of long-winded story about how he wanted to work with, like, in the nuclear arms area or something, and he decided that he didn't. And then all of a sudden, it created a doppelganger of him that wanted to, like, it's like...
that's important context to his story.
And then later on, they're appearing at conferences, and a doppelganger of him shows up at a conference. And I didn't go into any greater detail because I'm like, none of this is really making any sense.
So when he made that decision, it's like two of him split off into multiple universes. One version of him went into the nuclear division, and the other version of him did not.
Right. So when you go back...
And then later up, they met up at Kiwani Lapsarides' backyard
Well, this is the
and
thing.
had gay sex in another dimension.
Well, I don't think there's anything about the gay sex part, but who knows, right? I mean, it gives you a whole new term to go fuck yourself, doesn't it? But anyway, I get the context now, right? So he was like, it was like maybe because he was having this weird experience already, it's like this doppelganger of his appeared. I'm like, no, I was wrong. No, it's got nothing to do with that. All of that, completely irrelevant. Nothing, right? He's a shapeshifter, right? He himself claims that he's interacting with these beings, it induces a shapeshift where he shapeshifts into a Bigfoot.
What are you doing? Are you prompting me for the next clip?
Play the next clip.
I've also shapeshifted into them a couple times. Sometimes that's to facilitate going through the portals. Like one time in California, that happened where I went across this river and I shapeshifted. As soon as I saw him, I shapeshifted into him. There was a whole group of black-haired Sasquatch. And I messed around with this one for a while. He came up and kicked me in the crotch and kicked me in the balls and said, it's been a long time.
What? Kicked him in the balls?
Yeah. Kicked him in the crotch.
So he sees a bunch of hairy dude Sasquatches hanging out and he's like, "Roar," and turns into one.
Yeah.
And then...
No. You got to ask about. So to be able to transverse these portals, according to him, the only people that can are like the sacred ones or the elder, like the Bigfoot essentially, the Kiwani Lapsarides Bigfoot. These creatures, you've got to transform into a Bigfoot, and then that permits you access through these shattered glass portals. And he went through one, and all of a sudden, there's these Bigfoot everywhere, and one of them, as part of a game, comes up and kicks him in the nuts.
Why? Is that a greeting?
The host asked. She's like, is it like, do they give you a bit of pain as like a joke? He's like, oh, no. I'm like, well, then what the hell is going on?
It's funny, ever since Lapsarides wrote that first book, The Sasquatch People, how all of a sudden all these other people had these stories about their interdimensional Sasquatch portal stories.
Yeah, look, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that this is, and honestly, listening more and more to, again, I know I said it before, but I'm not disparaging him either, but it does reach the limits of believability.
So this is all in the same area?
Oh, this is when he was traveling around California, and like this is kind of the separate kind of area. But the reason why we got this is because he was in that area of Sedona where apparently he'd witnessed all these portals opening and this phenomena taking place. Like another one here, let me just describe this one for you. This is case 41. It appeared to be another portal or stargate opening. A white light object was seen streaking upwards and then disappeared in a flash of light, or into a flash of light. This was an intensely bright white light. There appeared to be a craft coming out of Fay Canyon and then disappearing into the light. In the instant that the craft hit the large ball of white light, everything vanished. This all lasted about 1 second or less, and it was absolutely incredible. So this activity, I'm like, okay. So we'll just skip over some of Todd Michael's work. I think I'm not going to probably go too hard trying to find the rest of his books.
I just love that first contact with Sasquatch is he just crunches you in the nuts.
Maybe it's like some alpha Bigfoot thing. It's like, see how much pain you can handle.
It's like two bucks butting heads, but that's what Sasquatch do. It's like that. It's like that gong fu that you just kick each other in the balls.
These Bigfoot though, they're just such dumb idiot. Just they're horrible, horrible creatures. So come back to these videos for me, Ben. Bring up. So this is Tom Dongo describing his experiences, and he says on the Bradshaw Ranch they had at one point thought that they were going to create something called like Old Western World or whatever it is. It was like this place where you could, thank you. Ben's just put an image or a video of a guy getting kicked in the crotch over and over again.
This is actually,
where they learnt this? They learnt this from ancient Bigfoot.
Yeah, like they have monkey style, mantis style. This is Bigfoot style.
It gets a brick and it's just smashing.
This is where it comes from. Like the ancient Kung Fu masters observed the animals in nature, and one of them was a Sasquatch.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're masters, right? So they can see into other dimensions, so they just see a bunch of big... Oh, my God, he's got this massive stick. Oh, that didn't go very hard. Come on, if you're going to do it, don't back off.
Blocking it with his thighs.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, exactly. I could do that. So this is the thing, though, that when they set up this Western world, it never really took off. Like the business model was never going to work and nothing happened. But they had this gift shop, right? And Linda's like, something very strange has happened in the gift shop. So she contacts Tom Dongo to come and have a look. Just play for me, Ben, number 10. This is him describing that experience.
You got it.
It was a gift shop that hadn't been used in years. And the stuff in there was real stale. There was bubble gum, there was candies, all sorts of things. So something had gotten in there the night before and eaten hundreds and hundreds of these. These are those pepper balls. They're peppery, sweet on the outside and sweet on the inside. They're about 1.5 inches. The doors were locked. Nothing was broken, and something had gotten in there and eaten literally hundreds of these things. Now I've saved some of these wrappers. Whatever it was sat on the floor and popped these things into its mouth. It seems though it walked right through the wall and walked back up through the wall like a ghost. It's the only conclusion we'd come to.
So there was no way to get in there?
There was no way. It was locked. There was no break and entry at any point in there at all. And yet somehow something had gotten in. And as he pointed out, it wasn't rats because they'd had to screw the lids off these things to get. And he said it was all stale. It's been there for years, abandoned. And some Bigfoot is eating these stupid pepper balls. And he ate hundreds of them. So it's like, as he was going back through he hears shattered glass and there's Bigfoot making terrible sounds.
So he's got a tummy ache. Then as soon as he goes through to his home portal, he gets kicked in the nuts.
That's that weird hub as Bigfoot throwing up afterwards. So then, of course, and I'll link to this presentation so you can go and watch it all for yourself. But there's a couple of things that I did I included a lot more, but I won't go into it. One thing I do want to include, right, is that they were, as Linda was doing and as Tom was, they were taking a bunch of random photographs and seeing what was showing up on the photographs, right? There's just 3 things I'm going to show you. Just play number 13 for me, please, Ben. This is something that they saw on their film or when they developed their prints later on.
This is one of the strangest photographs we've got. Now, there were 5 people in the area that night, and this wasn't one of us.
What the hell is that?
Yeah,
it looks like
freaky,
a horror
right?
film.
It has ears like Spock on Star Trek, kind of a bird-like face pushed forward. We checked everybody that was in the area. Nobody was wearing these kinds of clothes.
Yuck.
Isn't it creepy?
That's disgusting.
When you mention demons, immediately when I see like these glowing eyes and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a little bit more disturbing. But this was captured again and again because there's this scene, right? So if you can play, just not yet, but get Q14 up, Ben. Mm-hmm. So they're inside the house and we don't know exactly what this creature is because it seems like there are invisible Bigfoot creatures that are appearing. But essentially, Linda's camera, someone was picking up Linda's camera in the middle of the night and taking photographs. So they dust the camera with talcum powder, and this is what they get.
Something was picking her camera up inside the ranch house, taking pictures at night. She would set the camera on the coffee table. There would be like 10 exposures on the camera. She'd get up and it'd be 16. It took about 48 pictures inside the ranch house. And I said, hey, I got one of these light bulb ideas. I said, let's dust the camera with baby powder tonight and see what happens.
So Linda did. She dusted it with baby powder so that night it picked up the camera. And this is the print it left. It's either got fur on it or it's not quite materialized. But this is the print this is a print that the creature left right here.
Big fat grubby fingerprints all over it.
I mean, look, it is ambiguous, but you can see the difference there of where you got much smaller print for Linda and very defined edges.
Still got peanut butter on his fingers.
Smeared
from when he broke into that.
Yeah, exactly.
Broke into the pantry.
But they looked at the photographs that this creature took, right? So play 15. This is what they saw. Taken in the middle of the night.
About 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, outside the window of the ranch house, here there's something so bright it's actually washed the film out. And there's something on the table here. Linda thought it was their phone, but it isn't. I took the phone, set it down next to coffee. The phone is not the same size. So here's a black object sitting on the table that really we have no idea what it was.
What am I looking at?
So if you look into the center of the image there, you can see just to the kind of left of the midline.
Looks like a thermos or something that's just sitting on the table.
Yeah, and so they don't know what this object is. But what's fascinating is that in a number of these photographs that they take, there seems to be creatures that are holding some type of instrument, right? And whether or not, and this obviously is speculation, there's lots of speculation, but this instrument is some type of device that permits them to open portals or to, like that television show Sliders, for example. It's like some type of device that allows them to move through. It shows up in a lot of the images. And so one example is once again when they're outside, where they accidentally took a photograph of a being that appears to be holding one of these instruments. Can you go up and play number 12, please, Ben?
So one day I had taken the film to be blown up, taken the print to be blown up, and the guy blew up the wrong part of it, and I was disappointed. But then I got looking at it, and I saw a foot, a sandal, down here.
What?
So I'm looking at this thing, and I said, what the hell is that? I know this is in the middle of winter. This is about 20 degrees, and I took this photograph. So down here is a sandaled foot. Here's the pant leg. And this is either the hand or it's a device that it's holding. Is it a defensive device? Is it something, an illumination device? Is it what keeps it invisible? And then this is what is very interesting. There's a shadow right here. This guy was completely invisible, but there's a shadow on the ground right here. And this is a close-up of the object. It's about 12 inches by 10 inches. And it's metallic. You can see metallic coils in it.
The weird thing about this is, where's the guy's knee?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like if he hadn't pointed out the sandal, I would be struggling to make it out. But now that he's pointed it out, I can clearly see it. But where's the knee? It's like his leg just is straight and keeps going.
Yep.
But what is that?
It's so weird. And you could go, yeah, this is some type of pareidolia, but it's pretty strange. It's really, and this device, I'm like, well, then what is that weird glowing thing in the top? And he's saying it's a device, but when he does zoom in on it, you can see that it does have kind of like a mechanical look to some point, certainly in the center there. None of this is making sense, even to the point at the top there. Yeah, it's just all very peculiar, and they seemingly were repeatedly capturing these images. Now, look, we can't rule out the possibility that potentially, I'm not saying it was Tom or Linda, but maybe someone involved in this was pulling a prank. It was attracting a significant amount of attention, so it was being done for a hoax, and people do hoaxes for all kinds of reasons, not just attention, but potentially money and that kind of stuff. Maybe that's going on, but Tom insists that they are not hoaxing this. And I'm like, well, I don't necessarily think that he is, because it's not just Tom and Linda that are describing this. You've got plenty of other people, including, Bob Bradshaw, who's saying, I'm seeing this stuff too as soon as Linda showed up. Like this activity, and there's plenty of other people, plenty of other researchers that are experiencing the same stuff. And then decades later, you've got Antonio in his book describing similar phenomena.
This looks like something the hobo masters of New York City's subway would wear.
Oh, maybe.
Flip-flops, just like that.
Just before we go, the last video I want to play for you is also when they captured, when Tom and Linda were in the house by themselves, and they captured an image of what appears to be Spock.
Linda and I were standing side by side one night, and Linda took some pictures. There were no one else. You have to take my word for it. These are not hoaxed in any way. But this is probably the first genuine photograph of a male interdimensional being, or an alien. I'm not sure which. Now, it's very interesting because the ear is completely different than ours. It doesn't have a hole. There's just two creases in it. It's a little bit puffy. His hair is blue, but there was no one in front of us when this photograph was taken. There's no one else there except me and Linda.
Now, I didn't include it in the audio, but he says that the way that their hair cut as well, he starts to speculate that is like, did Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, because they've all got that kind of point in their hair, he's like, did he do that because he was somehow tipped off by researchers in this field? I'm like, I think that's a bit of a stretch to go into this.
Yeah, I think if you're listening to the audio, the problem with the YouTube copy of this presentation that we have is that it's so washed out and low resolution, we can't make out any details. So it basically looks like the rear profile of a white dude's head.
Yeah, but he points out, he says, look, if you look at the hairline's actually quite high, which is unusual. He says also that the eye, normally if you look at the eye from the side, that you should see more of it. But I'm like,
I don't know. I can kind of see, like, if you look at me and then you look at him, you can kind of see the resemblance.
Maybe it's you. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've somehow projected yourself in there.
Look at my pointy hair.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, the reason why I played this so more so was for him insisting that there was no one else there and they're not faking this.
Worries me that these interdimensionals have blue hair.
Yeah, well, that's a warning as well. But look, there's plenty more of this, and I will link to this particular presentation. It is low quality, and I've had to kind of clean it up a bit, but it is there of all the strange experiences, including things like he was describing that there's plenty of reports of hikers and other people, explorers that have been confronted by people in military uniforms. Similar to the stories that we've heard from the Blue Mountains of there being some type of base there for whatever reason. And then you find out years later that the American government then buys that ranch and sets up, a research facility. Mm. It's all a little bit much. It's all like it does, there could be nothing at all going on, but I think there's just too many anecdotal reports for people to completely dismiss that there is something very strange occurring in this location. But whether or not it's the paranormal catalyst or it's just the location itself, no one really knows.
Is there a real X-Files within a government agency that sets up covert operations to study these locations?
I'm almost certain that there is. Pretty sure. So, yeah, look, I'll link to that. And, of course, I'll link to Antonio's great book in the show notes, Tom Dongo's books as well, and Linda's book as well. Make sure you go and check them out. Possibly I will go into we ran out of time to go into Unseen Worlds with Tom Dongo. But, of course, much like many people that have these experiences in the following years, it seems like he attracted the phenomena to him. And we might go into that on a future episode.
Good stuff. Coming up in the Plus extension, Paranormal States, Psychic Abilities in Buddhist Convert Communities by D.E. Osto. Brand new book, some really weird stories coming up. We're going to be going into the mystery of the New York subway hobo masters.
Count me in, I'm there.
And their powers. And a bunch of other stories as well. It's not just hobo wizards coming up in
Plus.
Plus.
An entire book dedicated to hobo wizards? Oh, that's good, Ben.
I wish it was, but no. Hobo wizards and much more coming up on your Plus extension right after this. Head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today, get access to these huge extensions we do every single Friday. This is just the first half of the show. If you're just watching on YouTube, if you're just listening to the free show, you're not even halfway, honestly. The rest of the show's yet to come, but to get access, you got to sign up. Again, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Not only do you get our full shows on Friday, but of course, Plus members get exclusive shows that come out on Tuesday as well. And if you sign up for our MU Max tier, you get access to our entire back catalog going back 17 years now. Huge amount of stuff you're missing out on if you're not on Plus. Again, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. Help support your favorite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're on Plus, stick around for the hobos after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.